All right, so history, right. It's a trip. But ever get the feeling that maybe, just maybe, those textbooks kind of skipped a few chapters?
Yeah, it's like they're giving us the Spark Notes version sometimes.
Right. Like, what about that whole bit where we weren't the only humans hanging around?
Ah, you're talking about our pals, the Neanderthals?
Mm-hmm.
Harari really drives that point home in Sapiens.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to think of them as way back in the family tree, but they were practically our neighbors for a while.
Seriously, makes you wonder if they had, like, better tools than us at some point or something. If we were sharing the planet, how did we end up as top dog, brains over brawn?
Well, Harari suggests it wasn't just about being smarter. See, when the Neanderthals disappeared, a bunch of other big mammals went extinct around the same time too. And guess who was spreading out like crazy during that same era?
Okay, so maybe our ancestors weren't exactly the friendly neighbors next door. A little sus, maybe.
Just a tad. It paints a different picture, right?
Yeah,
But even if we were these amazing hunters, all that brain power had to come with a downside. Yeah.
totally. Big brains, big energy bills. Like, my brain feels fried after a day of emails.
Right.
Imagine if I had to invent fire, too.
And that's exactly what Harari highlights. Our brains, despite being tiny compared to our bodies, suck up a ton of energy. We're talking a quarter of our energy just at rest.
No wonder I'm always hungry. It's like my brain's running a marathon while I'm just trying to choose a pizza topping.
Right. And that energy consumption made us super vulnerable, especially as kids. We take forever to grow up compared to other animals. Imagine being chased by a saber-toothed tiger as a clumsy teenager for like 15 years straight.
Talk about a nightmare. Okay, so we were smart but squishy. How does a species that needs that much care actually rise to the top? That's where this shared myths thing comes in, yeah.
Bingo. It's a
Yeah.
game changer. Think about it.
Right.
Monkeys can't just have a revolution and completely change their society, right? They're bound by what they see right in front of them.
Mm.
We, on the other hand, somehow developed this ability to believe in bigger ideas, things beyond our immediate senses.
So we went from me right now to us later.
Exactly. Religion, nations, corporations, they're all like stories we collectively agree on. Sure, they're not real in the way a tree is real, but they affect how we act, how we organize.
And that's what gave us the edge, believing in stuff we couldn't even touch.
It's wild, right? But that ability to buy into a shared story, even if it wasn't about, like, gathering more berries, that's what allowed us to cooperate on a massive scale, to organize, to innovate, and ultimately to dominate.
Okay, but here's the thing about stories. They don't always have happy endings, do they?
And that's where things get really interesting.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, this whole power of fiction thing. We talk about the agricultural revolution like it was some big win for humanity, but I'm getting the feeling Harari sees it a little differently, right?
Yeah, he's definitely got a different take. Like on the surface, sure, farming sounds great, more food, more stability. But Harari points out that it's also when people started working crazy hours, dealing with new diseases, and bam, we got social hierarchy, inequality, the whole 9 yards.
So trade in the spear for a plow, and suddenly you're working yourself to the bone. And I thought sitting at a desk all day was rough. But seriously, how did this affect how happy people were? Weren't we promised a better life?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Harari's argument is that for a lot of folks, the shift to agriculture actually made life harder. Think about it, right? For the first time, you've got something to lose: your crops, your stored food, and suddenly you're vulnerable in a whole new way. Theft, natural disasters, rulers who control all the land. It gets complicated.
It's true, right? It's like maybe our ancestors were actually happier when they were just focused on the hunt, not stressing about next year's harvest or who had the most grain. It's really making me think.
And that's what's so cool about Harari's perspective. He challenges these big stories we tell ourselves about progress. Take money, for example. Cowrie shells, gold, Bitcoin. It's all just another story we've all agreed to believe in.
Wow, I never thought about it like that, but it's true. A dollar bill is meaningless unless everyone decides it means something. So we traded a nomadic lifestyle for, what, the joys of farming and currency? Sounds like a blast, but really, where does this leave us today?
That's just it. Harari's point is that these patterns from way back when, during the agricultural revolution, they're still shaping our world. Wealth inequality, exploitation of workers, that pull that money has on us. It all goes back to that fundamental shift in how we organize ourselves and the stories we tell about it.
And things haven't exactly gotten less complicated since then, have they? Harari doesn't sugarcoat the downsides of progress, does he? He really lays out there how advancements have often come at a cost.
Definitely not. He talks about the horrors of the slave trade, the way industrialization messed with the environment, even the ethical dilemmas we're facing now with stuff like bioengineering. It's a lot to unpack.
Okay, so maybe humanity isn't always great at learning from its mistakes. But hey, with all the knowledge and tech we've got now, are we at least getting better at asking the right questions?
Harari seems to think so. He argues that modern science, with its whole thing about questioning assumptions and admitting when we don't know something, that gives us a powerful new tool to understand ourselves and the world.
So instead of just accepting the stories we've been told about progress, we're finally starting to say, hold on, is that really how it went? We're looking for more than just a simple answer.
Exactly. We're acknowledging that progress isn't a straight line, and it's not always pretty. And maybe the most important thing is we're starting to ask ourselves, what do we actually want from all this progress? What are we working towards?
It's like we're finally realizing that maybe a bigger TV isn't the answer. You know,
Yeah, like maybe it's not all about the latest gadgets. It's about figuring out what truly matters to us as humans, what makes us happy. What kind of world are we trying to build here?
right. What are we leaving behind for, the kids and grandkids? It's a lot, right? Are we even ready to answer those questions?
Well, Harari doesn't exactly hand us a step-by-step guide. He's not saying, here's the secret to utopia. But he does make you realize why we got to be thinking about this stuff now, like right now.
Especially with all this crazy stuff on the horizon. Genetically modified chickens, brain-computer interfaces. Harari really goes there. It's like, are we about to solve all our problems, or are we walking into a sci-fi nightmare?
And that's where it gets really wild. He says we're moving from a world shaped by natural selection to one of intelligent design. We're on the verge of reshaping life as we know it. It's kind of a lot to take in.
So we're not just adapting anymore, we're the ones calling the shots. Whoa. But if we're holding the blueprint, that's a ton of responsibility, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's why, figuring out our own consciousness, what we desire, what we fear, that's more important than ever. Technology, at the end of the day, it's just a tool. We decide how to use it right, what kind of future we're building.
It's almost like we're becoming those gods we used to hear about in stories. But instead of lightning bolts, we've got like gene editing.
It's a good way to put it. And that kind of power, well, it comes with responsibility. We got to think critically, question everything. Choose the stories we tell ourselves carefully, especially when it comes to progress and what it even means to be happy.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, any final thoughts for our listeners out there? What's the one thing you really want them to remember from Harari's work?
More than anything, I think it's this. The future isn't set in stone. It's not some story that's already written. We're writing it right now. Every one of us.
We're not just along for the ride. We're in the driver's seat. Exciting, terrifying, probably a little bit of both.
Definitely. So go out there and think about the choices you're making, the stories you're buying into, what kind of world you want to see. Because in the end, the future really is what we make it.
Wow. A lot to think about, right? But that's what these deep dives are all about. We don't just skim the surface, we go deep. The big questions, the stuff that keeps you up at night, that's where the good stuff is.
And hopefully, those late night thoughts, they lead to better choices, better conversations, a better world,
I like the sound of that. So, to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Sapiens. And remember, if you were writing the next chapter of human history, what would your story be?